guys, and welcome to the world of Beth. Today is another ESL tips and tricks, and today we are going to be looking at the IELTS speaking exam. Now, the IELTS speaking exam is quite a difficult exam. It's an increment-based exam, which means the questions start off quite easy and they get progressively harder as the exam progresses. Now, it's quite an easy exam to do if you know the exam well and if you understand what's expected of you at each level. So, I have created this, which is what I call the IELTS speaking pyramid. So, part 1 is familiar topics. In part 1, they will ask you a few introduction questions about yourself and topics that are familiar to you, such as your hobbies and things that you like to do. They may ask you about your town. They may ask you about businesses or services or transport in your town. For part 1, you should really only answer 1 to 2 sentences. Try and keep your answers short. It's the shortest part of the exam and works mainly as a warm-up for the rest of the exam. Now we come on to the scary part 2, which is what we call supported extended speaking. Now, for this part of the exam, many students get very worried because we're asking you to speak for quite a long time, all on your own. In the exam, the examiner will say to you, you must speak for between 1 to 2 minutes. Now, that doesn't mean speak until the examiner tells you to stop. It means speak for between 1 to 2 minutes. So for a high score, we're looking for you to show control over what you're saying. You shouldn't just keep chatting away until I go, that's enough, thank you. Especially because this runs the risk of not covering the whole task. And although it says you should say, and then give you a list of things to talk about, you must cover each of those topics to get the full score possible at this part of the task. Now, you are given 1 minute to prepare for this task. So here are some tips for how to prepare for speaking part 2 of the IELTS test. When you have your 1 minute, get your pen and piece of paper and make some bullet points. Look at each of the questions. It will say why, how, when, where. Make a few bullet points about those things, so that when you're speaking, you can quickly look at your notes and it will remind you of what you're going to say. Now, you don't have to answer all of these parts of the questions in order. However, it does make logical sense as you're telling a story. So start from the beginning by saying, today I'm going to tell you about, and then whatever the question is. Then, for the first 1 or 2 parts of the question, you can usually get through that quite quickly in maybe just 2 or 3 sentences. And usually you'll find the last 2 points of the speaking task are where you can elaborate more. You can tell stories, you can tell anecdotes, you can talk about why this thing is your favourite thing, or why this is a special place for you. Really give us that information there. But so long as you're following that 1, 2, 3, 4, you're always going to get to the end of your 2 minutes and make sure you've covered the question in full. If you get to the end, we interrupt you and you haven't given us all of that information, we can't give you the top score for it. Also, be very careful with using too many high-level synonyms during this part of the test. We want to see a few. We also want to see some nice idioms. in there, maybe one or two, but we don't want your story clouded with too much. We want you to give us a coherent narrative. So in that minute, bullet point 2 or 3 words for everything that the question task asks you to give, and then follow them through in a logical pattern to tell your story. Part 2 of the speaking test in the IELTS is really important if you're looking for a score of 6 or below. In this part, we would expect students who are a 6, which is an upper intermediate level, to give us a really good part 2. So if you're looking for a score of between 4 and 6, say for immigration or study, really focus on part 1 and part 2 and making sure that you're good at those. If you're looking for a higher score, say 6.5 or above, that's where we come into part 3, Unsupported Extended Speaking. Now this is similar to part 2, and that we're going to ask you to give us a more thorough answer than the questions we give you in part 1. However, in part 2, where you have a minute to think about your answer, in part 3 you don't. However, that doesn't mean that you can't give yourself some time to think of an answer. This is easily achieved by following a simple structure for answering each question in part 3. And that's introduction, point 1, point 2, and summarize. Now when I say introduction, I mean reframe the question. So for example, if the question is, what kind of pollution problems affect your area or your country, your introduction would be, there are many types of pollution that currently affect the area I live in. And this way of reframing the question allows you a little bit of time to think about your next 2 parts. Now you come to your 2 points. So, for example, there is a lot of air pollution where I live currently. This is mainly due to there being a lot of traffic on the roads, so a lot of exhaust fumes, and there's also many factories that are adding to that industrial waste going into the air. Now we're going to come to a second point. Now this point could be water pollution, it could be noise pollution, it can be anything you like, as long as it's to do with pollution. So pop something else in there. So let's take, for example, water pollution. Following on from the problem with factories, factories also deposit large amounts of toxic waste into water, and this obviously causes a problem with our water supply. So water pollution is very much a problem. Many of our rivers are crammed with rubbish and are very dirty instead of the crystal blue water they should be. Now you're going to summarize what you've said. And so to do this, you're going to say, overall, I believe that air pollution and water pollution are the biggest problems my country faces with pollution at the moment. Now this will mean that you're saying around 4 to 5 sentences. And this is a really good amount for the unsupported speaking, extended speaking part 3. This way you're showing the examiner that you can answer the question, you can give examples, and that you can go back and demonstrate that you haven't just been randomly pulling sentences out, but that you've given a logical response. If you follow this format, you should only be asked about 3 questions. If you don't follow this and you don't give enough of a response, you may be asked more than 3 questions. And this is not great, because it means the examiner is looking for more response from you. They're looking to see if you can give better responses, use more extended vocabulary, and that if you can give better grammatical answers. Now, lastly, let's talk about mistakes within the speaking exam. We know that you are going to be nervous. It's an exam. Of course you're nervous. We expect you to drop about 5 to 8% of your normal score, of your practice scores at home, when you're in the exam yourself because of nerves. So don't worry if you make a mistake. There are 2 ways to handle a mistake in a speaking exam. The first one is just to continue like nothing's happened. Don't let it faze you. Don't start going, just keep going. The second is, if you are aware you have made a mistake, correct yourself. So for example, if you use the present when you should use the past, or you use the third person when you should use the infinitive, say, oh, I mean, and correct yourself. We call this auto-correction, and it can actually add to your score, because it shows us that although you're nervous and you've made a mistake, you're aware that you have made a mistake and you can correct yourself. So it means that in a normal situation, when you're not nervous and in a pressurized exam situation, you're unlikely to make that mistake. I do hope this has been of help to you. If this video has, please give it a like and subscribe for more ESL tips and tricks. And I will leave in the description box an outline of what the speaking pyramid is for the IELTS speaking exam. If there's anything in particular you would like me to cover, leave a comment, and I'm happy to make a response video as soon as I can. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye!